Hey everyone, ready to delve into one of 07's most unexpected transformations? We're talking about Timothy Dalton's stark debut in The Living Daylights, that pivotal Bond film where the smooth charm of previous eras took a darker, more intense turn. Buckle up for near-miss castings, hidden references to Ian Fleming's novels, and on-set anecdotes that even hardcore fans might have missed. Let's jump into this captivating era of Cold War intrigue, daring stunts, and the Bond that forever changed Bond. Timothy Dalton's debut as Bond. People often forget how monumental it was when Timothy Dalton first stepped into James Bond's shiny shoes for The Living Daylights, 1987. He became the fourth actor to portray 007 on the big screen, following the wildly different approaches of Sean Connery, George Lazenby, and Roger Moore. Dalton's arrival signaled a pivot toward a darker, more serious Bond, a portrayal shaped by Dalton's commitment to reflecting the tone of Ian Fleming's novels. According to various interviews he gave to magazines at the time, Dalton immersed himself in Fleming's writing to capture a Bond who was intense, conflicted, and closer to the literature than the sometimes light-hearted Bond from previous films. Even the film's promotional materials hinted at a sharper edge, showing Dalton in atmospheric, moody posters. The actor also recalled in DVD extras how he insisted on performing numerous stunts himself, wanting to convey a raw, physical style. Though some fans initially missed the suave humor of Roger Moore's era, others praised Dalton for bringing a fresh energy that injected new life into the series. From Fleming's pages to the screen, longtime Bond aficionados recognize that The Living Daylights is partly inspired by Ian Fleming's 1962 short story of the same name, published in a compilation that featured Bond's adventures in briefer, more contained narratives. This story primarily anchors the opening act, where Bond safeguards a KGB defector from a hidden sniper. Producer Albert R. Broccoli and his team borrowed the premise for that tense opening set in Gibraltar and the subsequent sniper showdown in Bratislava, though the rest of the film's plot took a grand detour into arms dealing, Soviet infiltration, and Afghan resistance fighters. In interviews from the late 1980s, members of the production team confessed they had to bolster the short story's core concept to fill the runtime. But that small seed, a defector and a lethal sniper, provides a distinctly Fleming-like sense of genuine spy intrigue that grounds the film's opening moments. Contemporary reviews in British newspapers like The Guardian praised the early scenes for capturing an authentic espionage atmosphere reminiscent of Fleming's writing style. Last Fleming title until 2006. For trivia buffs, The Living Daylights holds the status of being the final Bond film to use an Ian Fleming story title until Casino Royale revitalized the franchise in 2006. Before that, the series had run through most of Fleming's short story and novel titles. According to Bond scholars, yes, there are quite a few out there, Eon Productions had to increasingly invent new names or spin off loosely from Fleming's lesser-known short stories. Director John Glenn acknowledged in a behind-the-scenes feature that he liked having at least a fragment of Fleming's DNA in each film. After The Living Daylights, the next few Bond outings used original titles: License to Kill, GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day. Casino Royale's arrival nearly 2 decades later brought the film franchise full circle by returning to a key Fleming novel that had never been officially adapted, discounting the 1967 spoof version. Pierce Brosnan's Near Miss. The Living Daylights almost starred Pierce Brosnan, who famously lost the 707 role at the 11th hour. Brosnan had been associated with Bond since the early 1980s through his wife, Cassandra Harris, who played a countess in For Your Eyes Only. After Roger Moore stepped down, Brosnan screen-tested and apparently impressed everyone with his charm and ability to strike that sweet spot between sophistication and grit. He was so close to being introduced to the world as the new James Bond that some marketing preparations were rumored to be in motion, but NBC unexpectedly renewed Remington Steele, the television series that Brosnan led. Contractually bound, Brosnan couldn't slip away to become Bond. British tabloids of the day splashed headlines like "Remington Steele steals Bond" or "Brosnan's dream deferred." It was a crushing blow for Brosnan at the time, although fate would bring him back to the role in the mid-90s. One can only imagine how The Living Daylights might have looked had Pierce Brosnan premiered earlier. The Steele Standoff. Once NBC renewed Remington Steele, a standoff developed between the network and the Bond producers. In interviews decades later, producer Albert R. Broccoli was frank about not wanting James Bond overshadowed by a TV detective show, quoting him as saying, "James Bond will not be Remington Steele." The production team made a swift pivot to Dalton, who was already on their short list of possibilities. Brosnan recounted in later press interviews that he was willing to juggle TV obligations with the Bond shoot, but Eon Productions remained firm, wanting an actor fully committed to the cinematic schedule. This behind-the-scenes drama sparked a lot of fan chatter in the pre-internet era. Letters to film magazines occasionally bemoaned the lost Brosnan debut. Still, as history shows, Dalton took up the Walther PPK, and Brosnan would eventually get his shot in GoldenEye. The entire fiasco illustrates how ephemeral a casting decision can be, especially for a role as high-profile as Bond. Dalton's delayed acceptance. Timothy Dalton actually received Bond offers long before The Living Daylights. He was on the radar when Sean Connery walked away for the first time after You Only Live Twice, and again when George Lazenby departed post on Her Majesty's Secret Service. In 1969, Dalton felt that, at 25, he was simply too young to tackle 007's world-weary gravitas. Then, for Diamonds Are Forever in 1971, the producers allegedly approached Dalton again, but ended up recourting Connery with a then-record salary. According to the documentary Inside the Living Daylights, Dalton had always admired the novels and wanted to do the role justice. He just believed the timing had to be right. When it finally happened in 1987, that sense of readiness was evident. Film critics from the Times to the New York Times noted Dalton's intensity, praising how he carried himself with a sort of brooding conviction that reined in Bond's comedic quips, the Christopher Reeve curveball. In a twist that even hardcore fans might not know, Superman star Christopher Reeve was allegedly offered a cool $1 million to play 007. Producer Albert R. Broccoli was intrigued by Reeve's star power and leading man appeal. Yet the actor, who soared to fame as the Man of Steel, apparently turned down the chance, citing disinterest in stepping into Bond's tux. Rumors swirled in the Hollywood trade papers for a while. Various columns in The Hollywood Reporter and even a mention in Variety suggested that Reeve wanted to avoid being tied to another iconic character. Reeve later said in interviews he preferred to explore different kinds of roles, refusing to be pigeonholed after his Superman association. This near-casting highlights how open the Bond producers often were to surprising choices, though it's difficult to imagine a more radical pivot from Roger Moore's brand of 07 than Superman himself. Sam Neill almost, Sean Bean later. Another fascinating tidbit is that Sam Neill, a decade before bringing dinosaurs back to life in Jurassic Park, auditioned for the role of James Bond. Footage of his screen test occasionally makes the rounds at fan conventions and can be glimpsed on DVD extras. Sean Bean was also among the potentials, though he would later snag the role of Alec Trevelyan, 006, in GoldenEye, ironically becoming Bond's antagonist. Barbara Broccoli once mentioned that they tested about half a dozen leading men for the Living Daylights, and each brought something unique. From the vantage point of modern audiences, it's intriguing to picture Sam Neill's brand of understated intensity or a younger Sean Bean as 007, but ultimately, Dalton's brooding presence took center stage. Mariam Dabo's journey. Actress Mariam Dabo, who played the cellist Cara Milovi, originally wasn't slated to star in the film. She was initially hired to read lines opposite the actors auditioning for the Bond role. Barbara Broccoli, realizing Mariam's natural chemistry with several candidates, convinced the production team that she was perfect to play Bond's love interest. The actress had prior credits, including some smaller European films, but The Living Daylights thrust her into international prominence. She recounted in a 1987 interview with a French magazine that the audition process felt surreal. One day, she was a test reader, and the next, she was flying to different locations to shoot big-scale Bond scenes. Fans often rank Cara among the more sympathetic Bond women, someone out of her depth who shares an adventurous rapport with 007. A new Moneypenny. For decades, Lois Maxwell was the beloved Miss Moneypenny, trading witty banter with multiple Bond actors from Dr. No, 1962, onward. By 1987, the producers decided the role needed fresh energy, leading to the casting of Caroline Bliss. Bliss's version of Moneypenny was younger, with a more earnest rapport toward Bond. Although she only appeared in 2 films, The Living Daylights and License to Kill, Bliss's presence symbolized the franchise's evolving approach, stepping further away from the comedic interplay that defined Maxwell's era. Lois Maxwell, for her part, gave interviews expressing mixed feelings, sadness to leave a role she'd made her own, but also an understanding that the series was always reinventing itself. John Barry's grand finale. Composer John Barry's contributions to the Bond series are legendary. He worked on 11 of the first 15 Bond films, shaping the musical DNA of 007, from the brassy sting of the James Bond theme to lush orchestrations that lent emotional depth. The Living Daylights was Barry's last official Bond score before his retirement from the franchise, though he lived until 2011. He co-wrote the title track with pop group A-ha, merging synthesizers and orchestral flourishes. In behind-the-scenes chats, Barry admitted he found the collaboration challenging. Pop music production clashed at times with his classical leaning. Still, the final result is a distinctive Bond theme that many fans champion for bridging old-school Bond grandeur with a punchy 80s vibe. After Barry departed, composers like Michael Kamen, Eric Serra, and later David Arnold would try to fill those mighty shoes. A-ha takes the mic. A-ha's involvement in the title track gave The Living Daylights an extra shot of mainstream attention, especially since the Norwegian band was fresh off major hits like Take On Me and The Sun Always Shines on TV. Band members Morten Harket, Magne Furuholmen, and Paul Wakhtar collaborated with John Barry. Their partnership wasn't always smooth. There are stories of heated creative disagreements, culminating in multiple mixes of the final track. Nevertheless, the official version used in the film's opening is a moody, urgent piece that suits Dalton's Bond well. In some countries, the single charted decently, although it never quite achieved the iconic status of Duran Duran's A View to a Kill. A-ha, who remain beloved by many 80s music fans, often mention the Bond theme experience when discussing career highlights. Globe-trotting production. The Living Daylights was filmed across multiple continents, with dramatic set pieces in Gibraltar, Vienna, Morocco, and even a stand-in for Afghanistan. According to Pinewood Studios' official archives, interior stages captured everything from a Czech concert hall to a desert fortress. The ice chase sequence was filmed on Austria's Weissensee, requiring careful logistics to ensure safety on the frozen lake. Director John Glenn described the challenges of transporting cast, crew, and heavy equipment up the mountains, contending with unpredictable weather that could thaw the ice at inopportune moments. Meanwhile, Morocco served as the desert backdrop for scenes involving the Soviet airbase and Mujahideen encampments. This array of locations emphasized that Bond was still a global spectacle, offering viewers sweeping cinematography at every turn. The infamous cello escape. One of the film's most memorable stunts sees Bond and Kara sliding down a snowy slope in an open cello case, using it like a makeshift sled. Behind the scenes, director John Glenn said the concept sprang from a desire to showcase Bond's improvisational style in a comedic yet practical way. The cello case, however, was apparently not the easiest prop. Weight imbalances caused the case to tip or spin out of control, leading to multiple takes. In an interview with Starlog magazine, Mariam Dabo joked about the bruises she collected from repeated crashes. The entire sequence took roughly 3 days to film, with the final on-screen result capturing that borderline comedic trick that still felt believable for Dalton's Bond, who had flashes of humor despite the more grounded approach. A royal gadget moment. Prince Charles and Princess Diana famously visited the set, and Prince Charles playfully pressed the button for Q's so-called ghetto blaster. Though his cameo never made it into the final film, footage from that set visit was widely covered by British tabloids. Photos showed the Prince of Wales admiring various gadgets, while Princess Diana chatted with cast members. The cameo rumor led some fans to search for him in background shots, but his appearance was purely behind the scenes. However, Charles and Diana, attending the premiere on June 29, 1987, did produce a swirl of media coverage, underscoring how Bond movies often mingle with real-life royalty for that added layer of glitz. The first headbutt. Amid all the gunfights and chase scenes, The Living Daylights also has the distinction of showcasing the first headbutt in Bond history. Timothy Dalton's physical approach to stunts included more gritty moves than fans were used to seeing from Moore's comedic judo chops. This small, blink-and-you-miss-it moment, often cited by fans on discussion boards, underscores how Dalton sought to portray 007 as a genuinely lethal operative. Historical fight choreography in Bond had been theatrical, but here we get glimpses of brute force. Dalton later joked in a DVD commentary that he wanted to ensure Bond looked like a resourceful agent who would do whatever it took to win a fight. Cold War underpinnings. The Living Daylights is the final Bond adventure set squarely within the Cold War framework, which gave it a certain authenticity in the late 1980s. Over time, Bond would adapt to changing geopolitical climates, facing post-Soviet threats, rogue terrorists, or multinational villains. But in 1987, the Iron Curtain was still firmly in place, and the Soviet presence, embodied in the defection story and arms trade subplots, held real-world weight. The film's release overlapped with the tail end of the Reagan era in the U.S. and Mikhail Gorbachev's policies of perestroika and glasnost in the Soviet Union. Critics pointed out how The Living Daylights inadvertently captured an era on the brink of transformation. Fans sometimes call it a time capsule of 1980s tensions, the magic carpet that wasn't. Footage of a magic carpet sequence was actually shot but ultimately discarded. Rumor has it Bond was supposed to make a playful escape on a literal flying carpet, a comedic wink that tested poorly with the more serious tone Dalton wanted. Producer Michael G. Wilson admitted in a behind-the-scenes note that once they saw early edits, they felt it clashed with the rest of the film's vibe. Fans who have glimpsed stills or raw footage from the cutting room floor can confirm it looked out of place, like something out of a Moore-era gag, hardly fitting the stripped-down realism Dalton was championing. Gogol's replacement. Longtime Bond fans fondly remember Walter Gotell's recurring role as General Gogol, the KGB head, who, over multiple films, evolved into something of a frenemy. However, by the living daylights, Gotell's health problems prevented him from taking on a significant part, so the script introduced Leonid Pushkin, played by John Rhys Davies, famous for roles in the Indiana Jones films. Rhys Davies brought gravitas to the role of a senior Soviet figure who might be friend or foe, depending on circumstances. While many viewers missed Gogol, the introduction of Pushkin gave Dalton's Bond an interesting new dynamic to play against, continuing that tradition of morally gray Russian officials who sometimes ally with MI6. Dalton embraces Fleming. Timothy Dalton famously loved Ian Fleming's novels. Interviews from the period quote him describing the literary Bond as a haunted, disciplined assassin who loathes the killing but sees it as necessary. Dalton insisted on ditching many of the comedic one-liners that had marked Roger Moore's run, returning to a tone reminiscent of From Russia, with Love, or On Her Majesty's Secret Service. The result is a portrayal that feels less like a suave super spy and more like a dedicated operative under immense pressure. Box office results indicated that audiences were intrigued by this approach, though some critics felt Dalton's Bond was too brooding or humorless. Nevertheless, for many fans, his intense performance and dedication to authenticity remain high points in the series. Solid box office numbers. At a production budget of about $40 million, The Living Daylights earned an impressive $191.2 million worldwide. It debuted at #1 in the United States with an $11 million opening weekend, narrowly beating out the vampire cult hit The Lost Boys. Industry trackers like Variety labeled it a commercial success, noting that Dalton's arrival and the marketing campaign focusing on a new, dangerous Bond piqued audience curiosity. The film continued to perform consistently in international markets, reinforcing that the Bond franchise, despite changing faces, was far from running out of steam in the late 80s. UK opening triumph. The Odeon Leicester Square premiere on June 29, 1987, garnered the presence of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, further boosting the film's prestige. In its first 3 days, The Living Daylights raked in £52,656, eventually topping the UK box office with £1,072,420 from 131 screens. British tabloids covered not just the film, but also the star-studded events surrounding it, from Dalton's nerves about stepping into Bond's role to Maryam d'Abo's glamorous red carpet appearance. Media coverage hammered home that Bond was still a cultural cornerstone in Britain, drawing extensive media attention and fueling debates about whether Dalton could become the definitive Bond in the hearts of UK viewers. The return of Aston Martin. Bond's brand synergy with Aston Martin is legendary, dating back to the DB5 in Goldfinger, 1964. After a few sidesteps, like the Lotus Esprit and The Spy Who Loved Me, The Living Daylights brought Aston Martin roaring back with the V8 Vantage Volante. Equipped with lasers, rockets, and other gizmos courtesy of Q Branch, it gave fans a classic Bond car chase scene in the snow-laden roads of Austria. Interviews with the stunt drivers indicate they relished pushing that potent car to its limits on slick surfaces. Car enthusiasts continue to rank the V8 Vantage among the best 07 vehicles, celebrating the film for reviving that iconic Bond-Aston partnership. The gas pipeline inspiration. One of the more inventive sequences sees Bond and Kara escaping through a gas pipeline. This idea actually had some roots in real smuggling exploits, where smaller compartments hidden in large pipelines were rumored to ferry contraband across borders. The production team built a scaled version, employing practical effects and a sense of claustrophobia as Dalton and Diabo scrambled through the cramped pipe. Visual effects supervisor John Richardson told a UK film journal that layering physical sets with miniatures gave the scene an authenticity that green screen or rear projection might have compromised. This pipeline set piece is a testament to classic Bond creativity, merging espionage tropes with industrial locales. The brutal Necros brawl. Andreas Wisniewski portrayed the menacing assassin Necros with a highlight confrontation inside a kitchen at an MI6 safe house. The fight's extended choreography involved slamming pots, utensils, and flaming stoves, an intense set piece that underscored the more visceral style of Dalton's Bond. Wisniewski later recalled how 3 days of filming left him physically exhausted, praising Dalton for being game to do more of the stunt work than prior Bonds might have. Fans enjoy rewatching that no-holds-barred brawl, which stands among the series' more realistic hand-to-hand showdowns. Dalton's commitment to stunts. Apart from the Necros fight, Dalton demonstrated a fearless approach to stunts across the movie. He famously performed scenes on top of a Land Rover during the Gibraltar opening, attached to safety rigs but still perilously high above rocky cliffs. Crew members interviewed in the official making-of documentary mentioned that Dalton insisted on more than just cameo involvement in these stunt setups, wanting to bring sincerity to Bond's physical feats. His dedication paid off. Even critics lukewarm about the film praised Dalton's athletic presence. On set, he reportedly had some close calls, yet his hands-on approach lent The Living Daylights a realism that stands out among the pre-Craig Bond era. The Abandoned Doctor, no prequel. In the early stages of development, some creative minds behind The Living Daylights toyed with an audacious idea, crafting a prequel that would see Bond investigating Strangway's death in Jamaica, effectively connecting it to the events that unfold in Dr. Number. However, timeline continuity presented too many headaches. Introducing a younger Bond in a film set before the 1962 classic could have confused viewers. Ultimately, the concept was scrapped, though the tidbit occasionally appears in fan discussions about what might have been. The franchise rarely dips into direct prequels, preferring to reinvent itself periodically, rather than tie new entries too rigidly to older installments. Joe Don Baker plays both sides. Joe Don Baker appears in The Living Daylights as the eccentric arms dealer Brad Whitaker, a villain with a peculiar fascination for historical military figures. Baker's scenes add a bit of comedic villainy, portraying Whitaker as an enthusiastic megalomaniac. Interestingly, Baker would return to the franchise in GoldenEye, 1995, and Tomorrow Never Dies, 1997, as Jack Wade, a folksy CIA ally for Pierce Brosnan's Bond. This dual role is rare in the series. Typically, once an actor is assigned a Bond identity, hero, villain, or sidekick, they don't cross over. Baker's second casting emphasizes the producer's trust in him and shows that the Bond world is not above reusing talented actors for entirely new characters. The explosive key fob. Q's gadget prowess found fresh life in The Living Daylights with the Phillips key fob that responded to audio cues like a wolf whistle or the phrase "Rule Britannia." This little device unleashed stun gas and, with another command, functioned as an explosive capable of blowing through walls. It also claimed to unlock around 90% of locks. In typical Q-branch flair, the demonstration scene is spiced up with comedic touches, one being Q's concern that Bond might use it all in the name of duty. Despite the humor, the gadget proves essential for Bond's infiltration missions. Fans delight in these creative Bond gizmos, and the key fob remains a prime example of practical, well-used gadgetry from the series' 80s period. Mixed critical reception. Upon release, critics debated whether Dalton's grounded Bond was a triumph or a misstep. Roger Ebert famously gave The Living Daylights just 2 stars, arguing the film lacked humor and had run too long at 131 minutes. Meanwhile, Janet Maslin at the New York Times offered a more favorable perspective, calling it colorful but perfunctory, praising the spectacle while noting that the villains felt underdeveloped. British media outlets, especially those nostalgic for Sean Connery or Roger Moore, had varying opinions. Some lauded Dalton's authenticity, while others found him too somber. Over time, the film has risen in many fans' estimations, with some calling it one of the best translations of Fleming's tone to screen. Even on modern blogs and YouTube channels, you'll find lively debates about how The Living Daylights heralded a necessary reset, bridging the gap between the lighter Bond of yesteryear and the grittier style that Daniel Craig would eventually perfect. So there you have it. This remarkable tapestry of behind-the-scenes drama, near castings, scrapped scenes, royal cameos, and stunts all swirl together to form the tapestry that is The Living Daylights, 1987. It signaled a transitional moment in the Bond saga, turning away from the quips of Roger Moore toward a Bond who brooded, bled, and butted heads, literally. Timothy Dalton's debut might not have won unanimous praise at the time, but decades of hindsight show just how pivotal this film was in shaping 007's evolution. It's an installment that blends Cold War politics with heartfelt romance, culminating in a whirling finale of high-stakes action. Whether it's your favorite Bond movie or just a curious footnote in the series, The Living Daylights deserves its place in spy film history. And if you're feeling nostalgic, pop it into your watch list for an evening of cello case sledding, intense foot chases, and a very different Bond than the one you remember from the wisecracking days of the 70s, or the more modern grit of the 21st century.